Hi, welcome to SAW, the Sequential Artist Workshop. I've had a lot of people talk about organizing the material, getting their sort of raw ideas down, getting their pages in order, sort of assessing the project where it's at. And I wanted to show some of what I've done in the past. It's all analog, at least what I want to show for now. It is the 21st century, and I work in InDesign a lot now, and I keep a lot of things on Google Docs now. But the first thing I want to show you is full of dot matrix printers, and there might even be some typewritten pages, and it's a good old-fashioned binder, and I'll show you that right now. This first binder dates to 1993 or so. It's the collection of notes from Hutch Owen's Working Hard. That book came out in 1994. Here's a copy I signed to myself. It says "Get to work," just to remind myself to keep working. So what we're going to do is look at the enormous amount of notes and other things it took to make this slim little volume. We go from this giant binder to this little comic. So I was always a person who never really knew what his story was or even how to make a character. And so what you're going to see is this is the first drawing, for instance, of this character, and then just thoughts, little bits of dialogue, things that I thought the character was about. I'm going to skip over that. Eventually I started collecting some of these in a sort of list. These are things he might say. I've been known to pick at a place if I was in a bad mood. That is from a writing somewhere else. And in fact, what I started with was lots and lots of writing. I come from an old school, mostly influenced, I think, by Natalie Goldberg's Writing Down the Bones, where I would do tons and tons of writing just to figure out what it is I want to say. So that writing looks like this. And if it doesn't have a highlight on it or a marker like these, if it doesn't have that, I probably didn't find anything of use in it. So even in here, we're looking at an enormous block of text and just tiny bits of highlighting. And I remember this joke about the rich CEO kid playing a prank, telling his next-door neighbors that there was quote, a proletariat in the pool, and so that's highlighted. I never used that joke. It's 25 years old. You can use it if you want. But anyway, so there's just tons and tons of notes. And eventually, and again, no highlights on a lot of these. Eventually I started to think about how it was, like who these characters were. And I didn't exactly have the story yet. Right now I'm just scrolling through some of these notes. Some of these are photocopied from sketchbooks. A lot of these, like I mentioned, are dot matrix printers. I can't even remember if it's on a computer or a typewriter, to be honest with you. Another sort of rendition of who I believe the characters to be at that point. It's so early, it's got a different title. Annie Baxter book. That's a typewriter for sure. Anyway, that's not what's important here. What's important is that in this instance, I'm just trying to figure out what I'm trying to say, because I don't know yet. I also didn't organize this in a way for the archivists like myself to sort of figure out. But again, so I go back to the characters that I know about. Hutch is a character I know exists in this comic, and here's some things that he says, some of the things he believes in. Hutch is fun and flamboyant, just a sort of generality. The other character, Willie, is less full of notes. He's a less fleshed out character, but there are some things about him. He makes prank phone calls, maybe. I could build just quotes that were sort of in my head about the things that he might say. This etc. stuff is just things that might become fake ads in the book. The book is sort of interspersed with a handful of fake ads And those were kind of interesting. Also, I had this idea that I wanted to feature some boardrooms, some times in which people are, the CEOs, the company, the board directors, the people doing the creative ad copy. There's a couple sequences where they're developing the ads, and I really wanted to highlight just how sort of sinister and bankrupt that whole system was, I thought. So I was listing my original, my best ideas. And here I'm sort of combining the characters, Hutch and Willie, things for them to talk about. I'm noticing most of this never even made it into the book. And I'll even, feel free to pause and look at that, but I'm going to let you guys do that on your own. Here I'm starting to highlight the characters. Pink is Hutch and blue is Willie, and I wanted to make sure everybody is sort of represented in some sort of equal measure. Boardroom scenes are sort of highlighted in brown. And so I'm starting to think, okay, these scenes need to exist. These scenes need to exist. At one point I asked the character, what do you want to do in your comic? I want to laugh lots. I want to drive a blimp. I let him do that. I want to yell belligerent fools. I don't think I let him do that. Talk to commoners in bars. Never got to do that. Anyway, the more important thing. So that's the phase one, which is trying to understand what the story is, who the characters are, what the story might be. As I began to sort of throw down material that had potential for certain scenes, it went into the binder. So as I began to believe it's a book and it's a story, I began to sort of think about the scenes, and they had their sort of first sort of ideas early on. I knew there was a scene in the junkyard, and I knew that's where the main two characters, Hutch, Owen, and Willie, would have met. I think I left this page blank thinking I might sketch on it, but on the other side, I listed some of the potential quotes and dialogue especially that would maybe happen in these scenes. This parade talk of no one even cared, no one even looked, that made it into the book. Bad old bum, whatever that is, that didn't make it into the book. Old baby carriage, that didn't make it into the book. But some of these things they could happen in that scene. Boardroom 1, I knew would be next. And this was a list of what those scenes, what inside that scene, some of the dialogue, some of the little actions and cartoony bits could have been. And so I'm beginning to sort of organize the scenes in a sort of order. Can shaking, selling scene, and that would be the next scene that Hutch, Owen, and Willie would meet in. And so here's a bunch of potential sort of dialogue bits, things I'm thinking, okay, this could go in there. This could go in there. Again, something about baby carriages. I have no idea what that is. But Hutch is tacking up signs and selling books. That's in there. Something about thrift stores. I think that's in there. A poster, a board that says "Will rant for food." That's certainly in there. So this says "Trek to Fort." That was the scene. The next scene, that means they're going to so-and-so Hutch Owen's fort. There's only a few things in here. It was a short scene, and they all, I think, wound up in there. No, Ice Cream Headaches did not make it in. Anyway, fort is the next scene, and here's a list of things that they could talk about in the fort. We go to boardroom 2. So the important thing here is that, again, I'm beginning to sort of sort out what is the sequence of events, and especially what is the sequence of places where people meet to have dialogues. It was a very dialogue-heavy comic. It was a very idea-heavy comic. There's a parade in here. Again, parade compos. These are the things that could happen. This thing gets in blimp. Cool. That definitely happens. Blimp trek, meaning this is the scene where there's a giant blimp in the air. There's no compost. It's mostly a silent scene. Bulldozer, dialogue. And so here's some of the compost, the potential ideas and potential text there. Are you done? I could go on, actually. I think that was supposed to be before Hutch Owen dies. This sort of memory that happens at a summer camp. What are some of the things that could go there? again, this is all I'm just sort of writing down. I've in the first part, I've written down things that could happen in some of these scenes, and I've sort of weeded through there, gotten the good bits, and sort of put them into the scenes that they might work for. This is the closure scene because the summer camp is sort of the ending, and then there's some things that could go there. And after I did that, I began sort of mapping it out in panels. This is a pretty very verbal way to develop it. You notice the dialogues there. There's almost no drawings. There's one little doodle. This is just how I worked in 1994. I work a little differently now. I've worked a little differently with every book. But this was how I sorted out, once I had those scenes in order and the potential ideas in some of the scenes and potential dialogue in some of the scenes, I sort of roughed out an early draft all the way to 50, 47, something like that, pages. Sometimes smaller, but mostly I was drawing big. And then one more version as I was getting closer to sort of finalizing it. Now some really rough pictures are in there. And I've always been a very, very, very sloppy and frankly bad artist when it comes to my first drafts. My first drafts, this is the first draft, are always pretty ugly. It takes quite a few revisions to get it right. So anyway, here's the revision of the previous sequence. A lot of it's on lined paper. Most of it is. And then, I don't know what this is, to be honest. Maybe I'll take a spare moment to look at that. But so I went from there to working on real Bristol board, and eventually coming up with this book here. And not a lot changed. The drawings just got better. A lot of the early ideas that are in those early versions are still in there. They're just slightly better drawn now. So that's one book. That's one notebook. 25 years old is the time I'm telling you. It was before I knew how to make a book. This was my first experience making anything of any length, and as you can see, it was just, I'm not going to say it was difficult, but I am saying it was utterly confusing, and to get this binder to sort of sort things out and to be able to flip through things and flip around and to sort of start to organize it into scenes. What goes in the summer camp scene? What goes in the junkyard scene? What goes in the boardroom scene? To begin to do that was really essential, and then it enabled me to start to make the scenes in these visual ways. There's a lot of ways to make a book. That's one. That's the sort of brute force way.